This is week 2 of Patrick Lecture 187. And the title of the lecture is How to Handle Alternation of Expansive and Contractive States. And I really think it's important, and I push very hard to define terms. What does expansion mean spiritually? What does contraction mean spiritually? Here's the example that I found true in my life. I read a book on breath work, and I hope I didn't say this in the previous video. I read a book on breath work many years ago, and it said that the inhalation was actually contraction and exhalation was expansion. And it's like telling me that up is down. And I feel like I was standing on my head trying to figure out what the world looked like. I just couldn't figure it out. And I had to work on it. To this day, I still have to work on it because it seems backwards to me. When I read this lecture, that's the incident that is still in my memory bank that came up for me, is that's the, I needed to focus on the energetic quality of expansion rather than bigger and smaller. So expansion, contraction is how we judge. We're using the words to substitute for big versus small. But the spiritual meaning that the guide is pushing for here is that expansion is a state of relaxation permitting. Now, if you use your own breath for this, when you breathe in, you've got to focus, and things are going to be coming together. And then when you relax, that's when you allow. You don't have to work as hard. You just allow the air to escape, allow the chest to deflate, allow the lungs to deflate, and then you bring it together to bring in more air. And so what I've been focusing on this week is coaching people, asking people to allow their bodies to show them when they're in a state of expansion or contraction. Okay, rather than their mind saying bigger, smaller, out there, in here. Allow your body to talk to you. Allow your body to say, right now I'm all warm and runny and relaxed, and this is great. Oh, now I have to focus. And see that in terms of expansion, contraction. So feeling versus a thinking level. Thinking is actually a bit of a contraction. Feel it. If you start thinking, you've got to marshal your thoughts. Now, I have a bit of dyslexia about my speech, so I've always had to work really hard to make sure my words make sense, and sometimes they don't. And I've learned over the years that sometimes when I relax, I come up with the worst word salad anybody ever could possibly imagine, but I can hear it. And I have to say, guys, let me say that again, because that was really incomprehensible. And I can just feel people nodding. That was really incomprehensible, Jen. So that if I'm thinking and forming the words and making the sentences, I can make better sense. However, what I found was decades and decades of that led me to furrow my brow and focus so that I spoke like this, and people thought I was angry all the time. And I couldn't understand why they thought I was angry all the time. And I started doing these videos and said, ooh, she looks angry all the time. And I tried to relax, but when I relax, then the word salad comes out. So back and forth, back and forth. Now, what's my point? My point is that we've all tried to excel. We've all tried to do the very best we can, especially when we're talking to other people. And that's going to mean that we're in some level of contraction, which is a contradiction to spiritual work of opening and flowing. And this management of those two energies is what this lecture wanted to bring our attention to. Sometimes I feel that in the subtopics, I never get around to the main point of the lecture. In hindsight, I do. It's as if you clear all the bits out of the way, the thing the guide is trying to focus on happens. So if we clear out 3 stages of consciousness and we clear out what's the meaning of expansion and contraction, and we clear out, then we have a better idea, and it's a natural event, and it can be noticed easily. It's only when we're under the impression, it's only when our mind is superimposing an idea that we become confused about things. So feeling versus thinking effort can be conducive to understanding this better. Feelings, of course, can be channeled and pushed. They can be forceful. So different kind of feeling, a soft feeling, a relaxed feeling, a feeling of curiosity or allowing. It's as if we want to understand something before it even happened. We want to know the outcome of the game before the game is even played, instead of relaxing and enjoying the game without overly being concerned how it's going to work out in the end. The second aspect of this is learning to track both of them, which is why I'm suggesting that you use your body. I use that a lot because I use it a lot. But I also find that for people who think a lot and people who read Patrick lectures think a lot, these are very intelligent, intellectual, high-level reading experiences. And we can get seduced into thinking hard about it instead of relaxing and playing with it. So a long time ago, one of the participants told me that he would really appreciate some help. He understood when I would talk about it. He understood my comments, but he said, I wish you'd just give me something I could do on my own, like some exercises. And my first attitude was, you shouldn't need exercises. It's in the lecture. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I'm not a perfect person. And then when I got off that, it doesn't take long, but I do have to get off it. Then I thought, well, why not? Why not? I believe the exercises are in the lectures, but that's me. What if nobody sees them but me, or very few people see them but me? And then I began to read the lectures, and I thought, son of a gun, those exercises are in there, but they are surrounded by words. They're in the middle of a paragraph. And I could see where it's hard for some people to pull them out. They're racing through the lecture, trying to read it and understand it, and they don't notice the hint of try this, or think this way, or try this feeling, or notice this. So my first effort was to go through the lectures, and every time I heard a hint, I would separate that section out and put it in a box and call it an exercise. How clever am I to have all these exercises? Now, sometimes the guide's hint is a little bit too subtle, and so I just take it and run. I say, okay, nice idea, and here's a stronger example of maybe how you can feel or see or do that. What I am describing is that in reading the lectures, there's a tendency to just keep reading and go through it. And what I wanted to do was I wanted people to stop at the end of a paragraph and relax and play and do and think and feel, and then go on. And so that's where I got the rhythm of the study guides that I do. And so what I guess I'm saying is this lecture has been a lot of fun for me because it verbalizes and it embodies what I attempt to do. Now, I also catch myself racing through things. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. But after you race through and you realize that, you go back and perhaps relax a little bit, read it again. But it's about tracking, and it's about focusing on the feeling instead of letting the mind race through it. The other thing that is mentioned in this section is it gives 3 steps in this process. And I just want to repeat them because they're fairly straightforward. And the first step was to find the grain of truth in a situation. So we tense up because something's wrong. The guide's suggesting that the game of finding the grain of truth will prevent us from going into total defense Because to find the grain of truth, we need to find where we have a point, but it's only a grain. Very often it's only a grain, but the other person has a point. And there's a fear that their grain is bigger than our grain, a fear that we won't be able to defend our position. But when we go into defense, when we go into, but let me tell you my idea again. The other person sees that as a negation of theirs, and it just escalates. So for expansion and contraction, to hold the expansive state, spend a second or two acknowledging your grain of truth, and also seeing if you can become more conscious of the grain of truth in the other person's argument. Now, I've been practicing this a lot in the last few years, and it's helpful. It's educational, and it softens my fear. It softens my concern about my country, my civilization, my countrymen, my cohorts going down certain tracks of thought. Well, they do have a point. There is something that they are looking for, and there's something that I am looking for. And when I take that attitude, the guide's very big on attitude. When I take that attitude, then it softens. So find the grain of truth on both sides. Secondly, observing that contractive movement. You don't have to be contracted to stand your ground. That's going to sound like an oxymoron. You don't have to go into fighting position to simply say, I don't think so, and this is my concern. So notice the contraction, see if you can soften it. Just take a step back or take a step forward in an expansive sense. And observe the contraction, see if you can soften it a little bit. And then thirdly, to, well, I'm not going to go into the third because number one, I forgot it. And secondly, I didn't write it down. So it's in the study guide. It's in the lecture. And what I did want to go on to, which is, as I was writing, I guess I wanted to go into it so much that I didn't write down the third step. What I wanted to say was that I have noticed participants in the meetings are still chewing on the first week of the study guide. That the guide's iteration of 3 stages of consciousness, meaning fantasy, living to impress, versus living for your own sake or for the sake of what is, rather than exterior impressions, are 3 stages of consciousness. Now, I'm going to go back over it. Fantasy, and I've been thinking about this all week myself. Fantasy is when there aren't hard and fast rules. The rules keep changing. That's how I define stories, movies, films as fantasy, when they just change the rules so the good guy can win. They're not consistent. Whether it's science fiction or fantasy or fairy tales, it doesn't matter. Mythology and fairy tales can be very vibrant and true, but they work within a set of rules, supposedly. And when the rules change to fit whatever, for me, the fun goes out of it. There's no substance to it. So fantasy, one way to define fantasy is when the rules change, and either the perception of the rules change or our desires change, and so we decide what we can ignore and not ignore. So when you're living in fantasy, you simply reinvent things the way you want them, with no regard to how they would probably play out in real life. But the second one that has come up all week long is the second stage of consciousness, trying to impress others. And I'd like to describe this as when we are trying to bend the rules, not break them, but bend them. So trying to impress others is trying to puff yourself up so that you look better than you are. It's not complete unreality, but it's not reality. So we're bending the rules a little bit. We're trying to impress somebody somewhere. We're trying to be something before we are actually there. And it's a very subtle process. And it fits in with expansion and contraction because it looks expansive to impress others when it can actually be contraction. And the third, which matches the third step in that I'd forgotten about, is living for our own sake. Now that is very maligned. People say living for your own sake, you're supposed to live for everybody else. It's not possible to live for everybody else. We're not constructed to live for everybody else. We're not meant to live for everybody else. We're meant to take care of ourselves, take care of our family, and expand that to a wider group of people, rather than leaping over our own needs, leaping over our family's needs, and trying to serve a wider cause at the expense of our family and ourselves. So to live in reality is to live for your own sake, to live for wanting things for their own sake, rather than what they can do for you or how others will perceive them. And you can see how this drifts, how these stages of consciousness drift into each other, wanting to impress others until you get to the point of not being in reality and you're back in stage one, which is fantasy. So for me, these 2 weeks have just intermeshed dramatically, and I was fascinated to watch it. So I thought I would mention it. And that's week 2 of Patrick Lecture 187. I always encourage people to read the lecture because I'm trying to do my best to illustrate it, but I'm still illustrating pretty good source material. So I hope you do have a chance to read it. Thanks for listening.